already said I'm willing to give you feedback if you send me your draft, or if you send me once you're done, for example, is a first and second steps or third step, and I'm willing to take a look and give you my feedback. So I encourage you to start working on them. Do not feel overwhelmed. Start doing it. Once you start doing it, everything becomes much easier. So this goes for the reading assignment, for the reading log as well. My intention was for you to start reading as soon as the class started. That's at the beginning of the semester. But I understand some of you might not have done that. But still, the best way to finish it, the best way to understand it, is to actually engage it. If you don't engage the material, you will simply be intimidated by it, and you will miss the opportunity to learn from it. So be encouraged, and repeatedly, do let me know if there is anything I can help when it comes to the course. So if, for example, there is a reading section that's too much for you, that's too much to understand, to comprehend, I can walk through with you via Zoom or via Google Meet. I can, for example, mini groups that can help you. That's like study groups in which you can be more comfortable with the material. So I encourage you to start reading. As I've already said, the reading assignment is based on trust. So I expect everyone to be honest and to only report the actual content that you've read. There is no way for me to check that, of course. I mean, the exam will give me some idea, but still, I am going to rely on your being honest, on your integrity. So, I encourage you to do that faithfully, and I encourage you not to fall to temptation. Okay, I don't want you to falsely report anything that would be so unchristian, and that's not unexpected. I am saying this because I've previously caught students doing that, so I understand the temptation. You might tell yourself that you will simply report that you've read everything and you will read it eventually and all that, but that doesn't work. The deal is for you to finish reading it within the assigned time. So there is no way around that. And even if you haven't started doing that, this is a good time to start. You still have I believe almost 2 months, right? At least 6-7 weeks. So that's a lot of time. And your other requirement is the lab report. You will begin working on that starting from next week. If the Lord wills, we will discuss about Old Testament narrative in the coming week, next week, and you will do the first lab report on Old Testament narrative, and you will submit it on 24th of November in the latest. You can submit it before that, but that would be the deadline, and it's going to be a hard deadline. Okay, I want to emphasize that it's going to be a hard deadline. The purpose of the work, the lab report, the homework is for you to actually practice interpretive principles that we discuss in class. So there really will be no purpose for you. It will defeat the purpose if you do not submit it right after our discussion. It's my way of making sure that the theory, the interpretive principles that we discuss in class, actually crystallize in your mind. So it has to be immediate. So the 24th of November is going to be a hard deadline, or the week after each class session in which we discuss a genre is going to be a hard deadline for submission. So please do not miss that. I mean it. Okay, hard deadline ነው የሚሆነው። ስለዚህ ክላስ ውስጥ ዲስከስ ያደረግነውን ፕራክቲስ አድርጋችሁ ክሪስታላይዝ እንዲያደርግ አእምሯችሁ ስለሆነ ፐርፐዙ። ለምሳሌ ኔክስት ዊክ ኦቲ ናሬቲቭ ከተነጋገርን በኋላ ሌላ ነገር ሳነጋገር ዊዝን ዛት ዊክ ሆምወርኩን ሰርታችሁ እንድትልኩልኝ ነው ፈልገው ስለዚህ ዴድላይኑ ሃርድ ነው። ካለፈ በኋላ ለምሳሌ በ2 ሳምንት ምናምን ብትልኩልኝ ፐርፐዝ አይኖረውም እና ዴድላይኑ ሃርድ ዴድላይን ነው። ስለዚህ እሱ ጋር ፌል አታድርጉ። ከሬጁ እሱ እንድታደርጉ በጊዜ እንድትልኩ። ከዛ this goes without saying ግን do not use AI artificial intelligence አትጠቀሙ። it should be your own work. As I've said, if there is something difficult, I'm willing to work it with you, to work through it with you. And if you can also consult your classmates. You can meet virtually or in person and try to discuss the questions. But using artificial intelligence or copying and pasting an answer from somewhere else will not be acceptable. So I encourage you not to do that. So please don't do that. Other than that, there will also be an exam, final exam, and that exam is going to be based on all your reading. So once when you read in order to fulfill the requirements of the reading log, you are in a way reading for your exam as well. So make sure to keep that in mind when reading the assigned material as well. Okay. If there's something unclear about this, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we will. Yes, Asafa.
Okay. Thank you very much. What you are just saying and what you are just reminding every week about our task to be done is very, very, I appreciate it very much. And it should have been just done the way it has been said and written. And it's my first time that an instructor is just trusting his students to do assignments, reading assignments. And this is just a big burden that is laid upon us. As a student, we have to be very responsible. I believe that. But my main problem is, I am just reading. Till this time, I'm just reading, for example, Tate Unit 3, which contains a number of chapters. I'm just reading what's assigned for each week. But my problem is when as I repeatedly saying, because of that, I'm new for these theological issues and terms. I have just hard of understanding very easily. And when I just think back, how much I just know from those materials that I read, it's very difficult to know some of it. That is my big problem. Otherwise, I believe that at this level, we have to work very hard. And as you said, for example, using the AI or whatever just written, so copy and paste is really not recommended at this level, because I believe that my friends are just matured enough. We are in an adult age, and we are responsible Christians who are just serving in different denominations and churches. Therefore, honesty is not for the instructor or not for anyone. Just is honesty is for ourselves. Actually, we have to do it very diligent and we have to work very hard. I believe that. But my main problem is, getting understanding is very difficult for me these days. Otherwise, I'm just reading what is assigned to be read at each week. And the other thing that I just want you to, if you don't mind, is one of our friends last time asked you to share us your PowerPoint. I promised actually, but not yet. I didn't get it. And the material that you said last time on the detailed discussion of the steps on exegesis, you told us that you shared us in a one drive folder, but forcing this folder is very difficult, especially for me. Okay. If you don't mind, just it's better if you share us in a Telegram than that application.
Sure, sure.
Having I said this, what you are
I
doing
forgot to
in
copy.
each at each level or at each week, what you are just reminding us, very excellent. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Sure. I just copied the PowerPoint right now, so I forgot that. I apologize. I have also copied the exegetical steps once I saw your email, so the exegetical step is also there. Uh, and about copying everything in the Telegram, let me do that right now. Uh, I like the OneDrive folder because it let me update it, it let me edit it. That's why I prefer that, but I've just I've copied it here. Telegram is very informal, so I do not encourage you to be dependent on it that much, but I've just copied it right now, so you will find it once you'll find it later. It's copying.
Thank you very
And
much.
the other thing, I believe, check with Sganu. I didn't find your name in the list he submitted to me. I wanted to record your grades for the assignment you sent me for the two assignments, and I couldn't find your name. So I think the list he sent me is incomplete. But if there is some issue, you should deal with him. Your name is not here. If it's a
Okay, I'll
minor,
communicate with
sure. I have written your name tentatively, but I just wanted to let you know to make sure that if there is something, some registrar related issue.
you. Okay.
And other
Thank
about some concepts being difficult to understand. I mean, the do is when you find something difficult. For example, is to read more, to consult other books, and all that. But I understand that might not be always easy. So as I've said, I am willing to work through the material with you if there is something difficult. Not only you, but anyone else who is having difficulty understanding some concepts during the class session and from the reading as well. I'm willing to work through that with you. So, for example, you can email me, and we can arrange, for example, a 1 hour virtual meeting where we go through the concepts for just highlights the concepts that you're having difficulty understanding. So you can, for example, change them into questions, or you can simply tell me the concept. For example, I am not grasping hermeneutics, or I'm not grasping meaning, the meaning of meaning, something like this, and we can go through the material in that way individually. So highlight, just pinpoint the things you are having difficulty to understand, and we can arrange a virtual meeting to deal with that. So this goes for everyone. If you find something difficult, I'm happy to help in any way I can. But of course, the best way to learn this kind of things is to read more. When you encounter something difficult, go consult another book, browse the internet. So that's what's recommended. I recommend you to do that. But you are also entitled to have office hours with me. That's your right. So we can do that. Virtually. So send me an email, for example. I've just stating that I've identified some concepts that I need your help with, and we can try to schedule it, and we can do that. Is that clear?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So we can proceed to today's discussion. I think if let's try to first revise what we discussed last week. We actually went through the exegetical steps, right? So what do you remember? What are the steps we discussed? what did we say is the first step when trying to exegete a passage? Mogus, do you want to say something? You have to unmute yourself. I cannot hear you. And unmute your mic. Samuel, እስከዛ አንተ ንገረኝ. What is the first step?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Samuel.
Okay. So, as we have seen about last time, we have seen about the exegetical steps. There are 8 steps we have learned. So the first step is a textual comparison. We have seen about it. And
Yes.
also the second step is a demarcation unit of
Yes. Can you try and elaborate on the first step before going to the second step, Samuel? First step ላይ ምን textual comparison ነው ልክ ነህ? እሱ ላይ ምንድን ነው የምንሰራው አለን? እሱ ላይ ምን ማድረግ ነው?
So in the first or in textual comparison step, we have used different manuscripts or version to get appropriate words in the text. For example, we will use different versions.
Yes.
For example, the New American Standard Bible, Revised Standard Version, and also we will use different types of NIV or commentaries. So we will use these points in the textual comparison steps.
You're right. What do we want to achieve? ፐርፐዛችን ምንድነው? እሱን ስናደርግ ሌላ ሰው ከሳሙኤል በተጨማሪ thank you Samuel. What is the purpose of doing that? What is the purpose of using different verbs or consulting textual issues, comparing different translations? ምን achieve ለማድረግ ነው እንደዛ የምናደርገው?
እኔ ልቀጥል? ሶሪ
ትችላለህ ሳሙኤል።
አይ ለምሳሌ የተለያዩ ቨርዥኖችን ስንጠቀም አንዱ ቨርዥን ከሌላኛው ቨርዥን የተለያዩ ነገሮች ሊኖሩ ይችላሉ። ምንድነው ያለው ልዩነት? በምንስ ይመሳሰላሉ? በምንስ ይለያያሉ? የሚለውን ነገሮችን ለማየት ይመስለኛል።
ኤግዛክትሊ ዩ ራይት። ሊለያዩ የሚችሉት ደግሞ ከኋላ የተለያዩ ማኑስክሪፕቶች ስላሉ ነው ብለናል አይደል? ስለዚህ እነዛ ማኑስክሪፕቶች አንዳንዴ ትናንሽ ቫሪያንስ አንዳንዴ ደግሞ ሜጀር ቫሪያንስ ሊኖራቸው ይችላሉ እና አንዳንድ ትራንስሌሽኖች ቴክስቹዋል ዲሲዥንን ይወስናሉ። ስለዚህ እነሱን ለማወቅ ከዛ የራሳችን ኦፒኒየን ፎርም ለማድረግ ለምሳሌ የማርቆስ 16 ምሳሌ ወስደን ነበር አይደል? ስለዚህ የማርቆስ 16 ለምሳሌ ብዙ ምሁራን እዚህ ውስጥ መሆን የለበትም ይላሉ። ስለዚህ እኛ ከፈለግን አይ እነሱ ጋር እንስማማለን። ስለዚህ ማርቆስ 16ን ስናነብ እስከዚህ ቁጥር ብቻ ነው እስከ ቁጥር 8 ብቻ ነው ኤክስጄት ማድረግ ያለብን ወይ መስበክ ያለብን እንላለን። ካልሆነ ግን እነሱ የሚሉትን አውቀን እነሱ እንደዚህ የሚሉ እንኳን ቢኖሩ ከዚህ የተነሳ ግን እኛ ይሄንን እንመርጣለን የሚል ዲሲዥን ላይ እንደርሳለን ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ቴክስቹዋል ኮምፓሪሽን የምንሰራው ከዛ ደግሞ ወደ ኋላ ሂደን ደግሞ ቴክስቹዋል ኢሹዎች መኖራቸውን ማኑስክሪፕቶች ጋር ዲፈረንስ መኖራቸውን የቼክ የምናደርገው the most probable የሆነውን ኦሪጂናል ሪዲንግ ላይ ለመድረስ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ what is the most probable original reading? አሁን ያሉን ማኑስክሪፕቶች የኮፒዎች ኮፒ ስለሆኑ እርስ በርስ ኮንሰልት ካደረግናቸው በኋላ what is the most probable reading መጀመሪያ የተጻፈው ጳውሎስ አክቹሊ የጻፈው ጋር ለመድረስ የምናደርገው ሙከራ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ እሱን ነው ቴክስቹዋል ኮምፓሪሽን የምንለው። that's good, thank you Samuel. Okay, second step.
Shall I continue?
ሌላ ሰው ከሌለ ቀጥልሽ ሳሙኤል።
So second step demarcation unit እንሰራለን። ኤግዜክቹዋል ስቴፑን እንትን ስናደርግ ያ ማለት ለምሳሌ ግራማቲካል ክሊዎችን ተጠቅመን ኮንጃክሽኖች ይኖራሉ። ለምሳሌ ዘን ብሎ አፍተር ዳት ብሎ በት ብሎ ዘርፎር ብሎ የሚቀጥሉ እንትኖች ኮንጃክሽኖች አሉ። እነሱ ላይ ቤዝድ ሆነን ሎጂካል ክሊዎችን በመጠቀም ኮንቴክስቹዋል ክሊዎችን ሊትራሪ ክሊዎችን ተጠቅመን እንትን ዴማርኬሽን ለምሳሌ አጠቃላይ የመጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ክፍል ለምሳሌ የተለያዩ እንትኖች ነው ሊኖሩ ይችላሉ። ያንን ዴማርኬሽኖችን ተጠቅመን ኤግዜክታል ስቴፕ እንትን መስራት እንችላለን የሚለውን አይተናል። ሰከንድ ስቴፕ ላይ
ኤክሴጀቲካል ዩኒትን አይደንቲፋይ ለማድረግ እንደሱ የምናደርገው ለምንድን ነው? ዲማርክ ማድረግ ያለብን አሁን ዲስ ፓሴጅ ወይም ለኤክስጄት ለማድረግ ወይም ለመስበክ የሆነን ቴክስት ከፊት ምዕራፍ ቆርጠን ስናወጣ ኢት ሃዝ ቱ ስታርት ሂር ኤንድ ኢት ሃዝ ቱ ኤንድ ሂር ስንል ጀስቲፋይ ማድረግ አለብን አይደል? ሀሳብ አለመቋረጡን ልክ እንደ ሲንግል ዩኒት መታየት መቻሉን። ለምሳሌ አሁን ያንተን ንግግር አሳጥሬ መግለጽ ብፈልግ ወይም ስለአንተ ንግግር ሰው እንዲሰማ ከፈለኩኝ አንተ እየተናገርክ ያለውን ነገር የምፈልገው ቦታ ላይ ዝም ብዬ ከቆረጥኩት ለምሳሌ ያንተን ሀሳብ ልቆርጠው እችላለሁ። አንተ ከመጀመሪያው ጀምሮ ያልከውን አንደርስታንድ ማድረግ አለብኝ አይደለም? በደንብ ያንተ ሀሳብ ፉሊ ኮሚኒኬት እንዲደረግ። ስለዚህ ልክ እንደዛ የምንጀምርበት ቦታ መጀመራችን ሌጂትሜት እንደሆነ እዚህ ጋር ብንጀምር ችግር የለውም። ምክንያቱም እንዳልከው ለምሳሌ ግራማቲካል ክሉዝ አለ፣ አዲስ ሀሳብ ይጀምራል፣ ወይ ደግሞ አዲስ ካራክተር ኢንትሮዲውስ ይደረጋል፣ ወይ ደግሞ ሎጂካል ማርከርስ አሉ፣ ወይ ቴምፖራል ማርከርስ አሉ ብለን እዚህ ቦታ ጋር ብንጀምረው ሀሳቡን አንቆርጠውም። እዚህ ቦታ ጋር ብንጀምረው ሚስ ኢንተርፕሪት አናደርገውም። ስለዚህ እዚህ ጋር መጀመር ይችላል። ከዛ ደግሞ ይሄ የተጀመረው ሀሳብ የሚያልቀው ቁጥር 13 ጋር ነው ወይም ቁጥር 14 ጋር ነው። እዛ ጋር ለምን እንደሚያበቃ ደግሞ እናሳያለን ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ለምሳሌ እኔ አሁን ለአሳይመንታችሁ ሄብሩስ 12 ፍሮም 4 through 13 ሰጣችሁ ቨርስ 4 ላይ መጀመሩ እና ቨርስ 13 ላይ መጀመሩ ማለቁ ጀስቲፋይ መደረግ አለበት ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ እሱን ለማድረግ ነው ማለት ነው። ኤኒዋን ኤልስ ስቴፕ 3 ስቴፕ 4 የሚነግረኝ? Yes, Asafa. Samuel, you have to
okay.
Mute yourself, Samuel, Andy. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Among the steps that we have seen for exegetical steps ከሚለው ውስጥ among the 8 steps, third one was just investigating historical context. That means studying the history behind text that has been just written. What's the history behind during the time when the text was just written? Just the history that we are in today and the history that the text has been just written was very different. Therefore, we have to go back and study the history behind that when during the time that the text was just written. That was one of the steps that we discussed.
What about the fourth step?
May I say or wait for somebody?
Continue yourself.
Okay. The fourth step was about literary context, or just the literal context of what exactly what the text is just saying. Just identifying, as you said last time, for example, or as we discussed, just identifying the genres and subgenres of that, what the type of the text is, whether it is poetry or history or epistle or whatever it is. Just identifying this, we do just we have to do on the literary issues of the text by identifying these different types of genres.
Yes, we also consult the preceding and succeeding context, right? We want to study that specific passage within the broader context. So we investigate what precedes that specific passage we're studying, and we also investigate what succeeds it. So we took, for example, the example of a river, right? So a river carries different things from its origin up to the end. So in order to understand the content of a river in a specific point B, it's important to understand what it brings with it and what where it ends as well. So that's what it means to specify the literary context. For example, when you are trying to investigate the literary context of Hebrews 12 from verse 4 to 13, that's the exegetical unit you're going to exegete. It's important to understand what the author has said in chapter 11, in chapter 10, and it's also important what author has said in chapter 13 in order to understand that specific passage matter. So, for example, when you find the idea of suffering, when you find the idea of sonship in Hebrews 12, you have to define that sonship, that suffering, in light of the broader context, right? So the author has already said a lot about suffering and sonship in previous chapters. So the way you understand sonship and suffering in chapter 12 has to reflect what the author has said in the previous chapters. You also has to investigate what the author takes from his discussion in chapter 12 and in what way he uses it in chapter 13. So understanding the literary context simply means understanding the preceding context and the succeeding context, in addition to understanding the genre, the literary conventions. That's evident in the text ማለት ነው. Thank you, Asafa. Okay, anyone else who wants to tell me about step 5 and 6? Anyone? Andreas, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, teacher. In step 5 and 6, we seen the previous time. In step 5, phrase with words analytical method, we can use it. Each phrase associated with other phrases. In 6, verb by verb analytical method, we can see for exegetical analysis of hermeneutics. This I understand this phrase with words in fifth step and verb by verb analysis in the
Yes,
sixth step.
so in the fifth step, we are going to do a word by word study, what we call word study or phrase study. That is, you will identify important words in the passage you're trying to study. So important words could be words that are repeated a number of times, or words that are loaded with heavy theological meaning, or that are very unique historical background. So some words are very important, and some are very difficult to understand. So you will identify that kind of words, those kind of words, and you will investigate them. You will try to consult your lexicons or your Bible word dictionaries in order to understand the meaning of the words. So the meaning in context, both in historical and literary context of that word ማለት ነው. So you will investigate that word. For example, we do that every time, right? For example, if you are having a conversation with a person, and if in the middle of the conversation that person uses a unique word or a word that you don't understand, you would ask him, right? You would say, what does that mean? What is the meaning of the word you just used? So it simply means to do that with a biblical text as well. It's asking the meaning of difficult words or ደግሞ theologically very significant words. And the sixth step, as Andreas has said, is a verse by verse analysis. So you will treat each verse separately, you will investigate it, and if you remember, we said that exegesis, a good exegesis, one who can ask questions, right? It's about asking good questions, questions that actually arise from the verse itself, from the text itself. So you will treat each verse separately, and you will ask questions and give answers to those. So if when you read verse 7, verse 8, for example, what kind of questions arise from this? So those questions could be grammatical, right? They could be theological, could be historical. So you will answer those questions. You will show how each verse is related with the previous verse, and you will define each verse. You will study that verse. You will give commentary on each verse ማለት ነው. So that's verse 6. It's a very important part of your exegesis, and you should consult other commentaries, other academic works when performing verse by verse analysis. So you will first define what you think that verse means. You will come up to your own conclusions, and then you will consult others. So, for example, FF Bruce understands this verse in such a way for these reasons, but I disagree with him. Andreas, you have to mute yourself. So you have to it's okay. So you simply have to engage with academic works, other commentaries as well when it comes to your verse by verse analysis. And who can tell me the last two steps? Step 7 and step 8.
May I say?
Sure, Asaf, go ahead.
The last two steps are just summing up what we did in the first 6 steps. That means step 7 is about summary of the exegetical steps that we done. So summarizing and just concluding what we have just learned in the previous steps. And the last step is just application. That means what we did and what we exegete, how we can apply to our life, to our situation, to our just generally for our life, how we can just apply that. Application is the last step for this process.
Yes, you're right. So the step is going to be the exegetical summary. It's about synthesizing what you've done in step 6 in the verse analysis. So you will provide an exegetical summary. So you will say this is what the text means. It simply means like you're in exegetical summary. You should answer the question, what does this text mean? What does this text mean in the first context? And you will say the text meant da 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 in the first context. And in the application, you answer the question, what does this text mean to us, to modern readers? And it means da 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 da. So it's the last two steps are about the meaning of the text in different contexts. The first one is you are going to summarize what you've investigated so far and say Hebrews 12 from verse 4 to 13 meant this to the first readers. So this is the first context. And in the application part, since we believe this is the word of God, it speaks to us, right? You will try to answer that. The Hebrews 12 in my context means this. It's telling me to do this. It's informing me this, or it's exhorting me to do this or that. So those are the last two steps. It's not good. As I've said last time, this doesn't mean that you have to follow these steps dogmatically or religiously. This is it's just a way of making sure you practice the best practices, the steps. So once you become extremely comfortable with the steps, you wouldn't have to worry about following each step. It in a way will become part of you, and you will know how to deal with each passage without going through those steps. Good. So now we are going to talk about trying to exegete Old Testament law. As I've said, from now on, we are going to focus on different genres found in our Bible, and we are going to talk about specific principles that we should be aware of when trying to deal with each genre. So የስነ ጽሁፍ የተለያዩ የስነ ጽሁፍ ዘውጎች ዘዬዎች አሉ መጽሐፍ ቅዱሳችን ውስጥ። ስለዚህ እነሱ ደግሞ የየራሳቸው ኮንቬንሽኖች አሉ። ልክ ዣንራ ማተር ስለሚያደርግ ማለት ነው። ለምሳሌ ደብዳቤ በእኛ ዘመን ደብዳቤ የምናነብበት መንገድና የዜና ሪፖርት የምናነብበት መንገድ ኦር ግጥም የምናነብበት መንገድ እንደሚለያየው ሁሉ መጽሐፍ ቅዱሳችን ውስጥ ያለ ዣንራ የየራሳቸው ደግሞ ዩኒክ የሚያደርጋቸው ነገር አለ። ስለዚህ አሁን ያወራናቸው እነዚህ 8 ኤክሴጀቲካል ስቴፕስ they apply everywhere. They are the basics of exegesis. But depending on the genre you are dealing with, you should be aware of ደግሞ some other principles ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ we are going to principles. Okay, so the purpose of talking about taking a genre based approach is for you to appreciate how the different types of texts in the Bible have their own flavors. So it's about trying to identify that flavor, and you are supposed to take this and synthesize it with the exegetical steps we just discussed. So when we talk about interpreting the law, it doesn't mean that the 8 exegetical steps we discussed doesn't apply. It applies, but interpreting the law, the more it has its own features. The Bible is not uniform, right? Each passage has its own flavor, so it's about appreciating that ማለት ነው። So for example, think about eating food, right? ለምሳሌ የሆነ ሰው ምግብ እንዴት ነው የሚበላው ብሎ ቢጠይቃችሁ የምትነግሩት ነገር አለ አይደል? ለምሳሌ እጃችሁ መጀመሪያ እጅን ታጠብ ልጃችሁን ያስተማራችሁ ከሆነ you would tell him to first wash his hands and then to sit down and then so for example take an appropriate piece and መጉረስ ቢጎረስ ከሆነ ጉረሰው or use an appropriate utensil, things like that, right? You might come up with a generic 5 or 6 steps on how to eat food, on how to eat an Ethiopian food, right? But those steps are generic steps, and you might have to nuance them depending on the type of food you are eating, right? Those steps are the basics. They might apply everywhere, but depending on the kind of food that kid is trying to eat, you might need to adjust some of it. You might need to incorporate certain specific steps to it, right? For example, if that boy is trying to eat pasta or something, you might have to adjust your steps a bit. And if he's trying to eat, for example, a cookie, and you need to adjust that a bit, right? So the general principle still applies. For example, the rule about chewing properly, the rule about swallowing, the rule about washing, it might apply everywhere, but it might need some nuance depending on the type of food your kid is trying to eat. So that's what we are trying to do, okay? There are variety of types, variety of texts, variety of foods, so to say, in the Bible. So we have to nuance them in a bit, in a variety
Sorry,
of ways.
Inspector, sorry.
Sure, Asaf.
Sorry, is it only my problem, or rather there is an interruption behind? I mean, in between when we are just talking. If it is only my problem, it's okay. Otherwise, there is an interruption in the midst of your discussion.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Is anyone else having difficulty following?
It's clear for us.
It's
Asafa, the problem is with you.
Okay. Asafa, there
It might be
might
mine,
be
or
an
continue.
internet
It
issue.
is only mine. Go on.
Okay. So as I've said, you can see the Bible as in that metaphor as well. There are variety of types, variety of foods in the biblical passage, in the biblical corpus. So there is a need to consider that type in a way ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ you should when you talk about interpreting a certain biblical genre like the law, you should consider the exegetical steps should lie in the background of your mind. They always apply, but the more there is need to modify them a bit, to nuance them a bit in order to appreciate the type of the text you are dealing with. So that's what we are trying to do. Okay, there's that. Good. So let's talk about the law, the biblical law. So the law is a technical term. So whenever you find the word law in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, it's oftentimes talking about the Torah as a whole. That is the 5 books of the Bible of Moses. And when the Bible says about fulfilling the law, for example, or fulfilling or the law being abolished, things like that, it's talking about the covenant as a whole, the books as a whole, the Torah as a whole. But when you talk about interpreting the law, we are talking about the law as a genre, okay, as a text type. We are not talking about the corpus as a whole. We are rather talking about the Okay, Asir, we can talk about it later. Okay. So when we go in this, we are talking about the law ascetics type. So for example, there is a narrative in the Torah. There is also poetry in the Torah, in the book of Moses. But when we say law, we are specifically talking about law as commandments. Okay, we are talking about the commandments. We are talking about the law, not as law as differentiate between those. So we interpreting law as position of talking about the whole of the law. But also very easy to understand. We rather take a very unique approach when it comes to the law. Christians, I mean. So there are laws that we feel like following, that we try to apply, we try to literally understand and take them when it comes to modern context. But there are laws that we totally abandon, right? So the reason for that is that we find it difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand the law is very archaic. It's very departed from our context, from modern context. So we oftentimes struggle with it. For example, think of the case of tithing, for example, the case of asrat mastat. So when, for example, Christians, at least evangelical Christians, we feel like that law still applies for us, right? We, at least most of us, think that way. Most churches, most evangelical churches, I feel like the tithing law still applies. So they will try to interpret that, and it's very common to hear sermons that encourage tithing, that encourage giving tens of what we earn, and it's really common to treat it as a sin, right? We in fact hear very harsh sermons declaring that those that do not tithe are actually robbing God, right? And those are thieves, and that they should be condemned and all that. But at the same time, we also ignore other laws that come in the same context as tithing comes. And so, for example, there are laws about harvesting. There are laws about clauses that we do not follow, but that those are given in the same context as tithing, and all that. So we take a very selective approach when it comes to the law. Evangelicals, we take a very selective approach, and I would argue that that's not the best approach. We should So it's because some are very difficult to understand and to apply, and some seem doable. So our approach seems to be that we should follow those who seem doable to us, and we should ignore those who feel impossible to us. So, for example, think of Leviticus 19. There is a commandment in Leviticus 19 that says that you shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your animals breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you put on a garment made of two different materials. So this is a commandment about separation. And the Pentateuch, the Leviticus says that we shouldn't let different animals breed. Two animals should not breed. And we also should not sow a field with two kinds of seeds. So I do not know how many of you are have worked on a farm or have worked with animals, but the Bible actually, Leviticus actually prohibits us from, for example, planting two kinds of seed on a field. ይህ ማለት አንድ እርሻ ላይ ለምሳሌ ስንዴና ጤፍ እንዳይዘራ እንደማለት ነው። እንስሳትም ደግሞ ሁለት የተለያዩ አኒማሎች ደግሞ እንዳይዳቀሉ ነው የሚባለው አይደል? በእኛ ቋንቋ እንደዛ እንዳይደረግ ይላል። and even worse for us, it prohibits us from wearing two different materials on our clothes, garments made from two different kind of materials. ስለዚህ ስትለብሱ ለምሳሌ ከአንድ አይነት ማቴሪያል ብቻ የተሰራ ልብስ ይላል። ስለዚህ ጥጥና ፖሊስተር ኦር ምንድነው ሌላ ማቴሪያል እንደዚህ ብቻ የምትለብሷቸው ልብሶች በተመሳሳይ ማቴሪያል የሆኑ ይላል። for example, if you see the tag on your jacket, most of us, I'm sure there is at least 3-4 different kind of materials there. So it seems to it is prohibiting that kind of habit. Think of Leviticus 12, the purity laws and regarding women. There is a complex laws that prohibits women from socializing and from entering the temple of God when after they give birth or after their menstrual cycles and all those things. And there is also in this same context we find Leviticus 27, and it talks about tithing. It talks about asrat makfar. So my point is that we ignore all the others, but we try to follow this one. And think of, for example, very odd sounding laws that are found in Exodus 34, for example. It prohibits, for example, from cooking a young goat in mother's milk. ጠቦትን በእናቷ ወተት አትቀቅሏት የሚል and for example there is Leviticus 19 which prohibits from putting tattoos on ourselves. So መነቀስን ደግሞ የሚከለክል እናገኛለን. We try to follow this one, but we try to ignore the others. So my point is that we have a very selective approach. So biblical laws, they are often categorized by scholars as apodactic and casuistic law. Apodactic law ምንላቸው they are direct absolute commands. For example, think of the 10 commandments. That sounds like an absolute commandment. For example, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart. So there is no condition associated with them. But casuistic ምንላቸው conditional commands ናቸው. They are a case by case law. For example, Deuteronomy 22 says, when you build any house, አዲስ ቤት ስትሰሩ ብሎ it gives a commandment. So that commandment is conditional. It works if one is building a house ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ there are two kinds of laws structural in the Old Testament, apodactic and causatic laws. So why do we adhere to some laws and ignore others? That's an important question. And how should we deal with the difficulty that this presents? So what do you think? Why do we think that we try to obey some laws while at the same time ignoring others? የለም So the most common answer that you find is that the law should be divided into three. This is a very ancient, a very classical way of trying to make sense of the law. It's a very Christian interpretation. It says that the commandments in the law should be divided into three. It says that there are ritual or ceremonial laws, and there are social or civil laws, and there are moral laws. So the argument goes that ritual and social ritual laws have been fulfilled in Christ, that the Lord has fulfilled the ritual laws, and the social or the civil laws only applied for Israel as a nation. That's the state of Israel. And moral laws are the timeless ones that we should follow. So this is the kind of division, a tripartite division that most Christians argue for when it comes to the law. This is a very helpful division, and it's understandable. It is easy to understand. It is easy to understand the question it's trying to answer, but the problem is that the Torah itself doesn't give us any kind of distinction like that. Not only the Torah, but the New Testament also doesn't give us this kind of distinction. The whole of the law was theological in a sense, because it was given by God. It's a perfect reflection of what God desires from His people. So we don't see because both are sin. So what makes it unique is that the Old Testament law. So since the Old Testament law was given by God, since the Israelites understood it to be given by God, each trespassing of the law was treated as Israeli sin. That's a very unique approach, right? Because trespassing law doesn't necessarily have to be equated with law, and this can't really apply anywhere else. It seems to only apply in the Old Testament laws. Because think of, for example, the laws of this country, the laws of Ethiopia. You could break a law, for example, a certain law, but that doesn't make it sin, right? For example, you could break a traffic law. You could break, for example, tax law, be it intentionally or unintentionally, but that doesn't make it automatically sin, right? But when it comes to the Old Testament, breaking the ritual law is equally as sinful as breaking the social law or breaking what you call the moral law. They are all theological since they are given directly by God. So we don't really find this kind of distinction in the Old Testament. So that makes it a bit difficult. This is so the problem with this division. I mean, you could follow it to some degree. You could still follow it. I'm not arguing against it, but I'm just making the claim that we don't find this kind of divisions in the Old Testament itself, and it's not helpful when it comes to the interpretive task. It rather will lead us to miss out on some important points that we can learn from the so-called ritual law or the so-called social law. Moreover, it's not always easy to classify a certain commandment as moral law or as ritual law or as social law. There is overlap. There is a very significant overlap between these commandments. So it's not always easy, for example, to classify a certain commandment as a moral law or as a social law. For example, as I've said earlier, think of the law of tithing, for example, the law of giving tenths out of your family. So there are places, for example, in texts like Deuteronomy, that it almost sounds like a ritual, a ceremonial law. The tithe is going to be, it's encouraged to be given directly to the temple, to the Levites, and all that kind of thing. But we also find in it a very social component as well. And we can also find you see it. We can also see it as being moral in a sense. So it's not always easy to say a certain commandment is a ritual law or a ceremonial law or a social law or a moral law. There is an overlap between them. There is an overlap between them. So it's not this tripartite division cannot really help us go all the way through it ማለት ነው። So for example, think of the commandment in Leviticus 19 that says that do not plant your field with two kinds of seed, and do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Now, what would you say is this field? So the first one seems to be a social law, right? And we could also argue that wearing clothes is a social phenomenon, so we should see it as a social law. But the problem with this is that in the context, Leviticus 19 is given as a reflection of God's holiness. So it starts by saying that since God is holy, it's God speaking. God says, so since I am holy, you should also be holy. So it's about holiness, and since the way that holiness, the way that the people of God shows that they are holy, is reflected in this commandment. So it will be in a way wrong to say this is merely a social law. It rather has a very theological weight that we can almost give it a moral dimension as well. So it's not always easy to classify commandments as ritual or as moral or as social ማለት ነው. So how should we deal with it? How should we deal with Old Testament law? At least how should we interpret it, right? Leaving the theological divisions to the theologians, just hermeneutically speaking, how should we deal with the Old Testament law? As I've already said, we should have a very uniform approach to the law. So it's simply wrong to try to transport laws that seem favorable to us or that seems doable to us to the New Testament, to our context, and then to ignore those that seem out of touch, or that seem traditional, or that seem harsh to us. And we should have a consistent way of reading Old Testament laws, reading and applying Old Testament laws ማለት ነው. So there are some considerations to take into mind when dealing with the Old Testament laws. As I've said at the beginning, these are to be seen in accordance with the exegetical steps we've already discussed. So the first one is a theological consideration. You should always realize that the law was the stipulation part of the Mosaic covenant. The law was part of the Mosaic covenant. We have to understand that, right? So the law, think of, for example, an employment contract you have with your law employer, or a business contract you have with a certain company. So an important part of that covenant, an important part of that contract are the stipulations, right? It lists what you are supposed to do in order to stay in the boundary of that contract, and it also lists what the employer is supposed to do, right? So covenants in the Old Testament also worked in this way. In order to remain in the covenant, the two parties, they have to do some things. So the law is the stipulation part of the covenant. It is part of the covenant. The Mosaic law was given within the context of the covenant. So you should think of, for example, Sinai. So what happened in Sinai is that God made a covenant with the people, right? So the stipulation of that covenant was the law, what we call the commandments. ስለዚህ ህጉን ትንቅ ስታስቡ ሁሌ የኪዳኑ የስቲፕሌሽን ፓርት እንደሆነ ማሰብ አለባችሁ። ልክ እናንተ የስራ ስትቀጠሩ ለምሳሌ ኮንትራት ስትፈራረሙ በዛ ኮንትራታችሁ ስለመቀጠል ማድረግ ያለባችሁ ሪኳየርመንት አለ አይደል? it could be job description, it could be moral conduct or የኦፊስ workplace መስማማባችሁ ነገሮች ሊሆኑ ይችላሉ። those are given as part of the covenant, right? They are the stipulation part of that contract. It's the way you remain in that contract. It's the way you remain employed in that company, right? The Old Testament laws are also a stipulation part of the Mosaic covenant. They were given as part of the Mosaic covenant ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ you always have to remember that the Old Testament laws are part of the Mosaic covenant. For example, we find 4 main collections of commandments in the Old Testament. The first one is, for example, the Decalogue and the Book of the Covenant, found in the Exodus 20 to 23. Second one is the Tabernacle laws, and the third one is the law of Leviticus, and the final is the Deuteronomistic law. So all laws, all these commandments are given within a wider context of the Mosaic covenant. It's about maintaining the covenant that God gave to the people of Israel through Moses ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ we have to understand that the Mosaic okay ጥያቄዎቻችሁን ያዩዋችሁን እንመልሳችኋለን። እሺ so you have to understand that it was given within a broader context, and that the commandments are not isolated in any way, shape, or form. Okay, they are not isolated. They rather are part of the covenant ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ይህንን ማሰብ አለባችሁ። The law is part of the Mosaic covenant. It's part of the Mosaic covenant. Hence, the Mosaic covenant is no longer a functional covenant, right? We are not under the Mosaic covenant. This not only now, not only to those of us living past this event, but even if we were living in the biblical times, you have to understand that the Mosaic covenant is a covenant for the Israelites. It was not a covenant for the Gentiles. For us, as you know, we are Gentiles, we are not Jews. So the Mosaic covenant, even if we were living during that period, during the Mosaic period, they were not made to us. We are not part of the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant was not given to us. We were not part of the Mosaic covenant. The land of Israel was not promised to us, right? Well, we were not promised to inherit the land that brings forth honey and milk. So we are not part of the Mosaic covenant. You have to understand that. So the first thing to understand is that the commandments are part of the Mosaic covenant. And second thing is to understand that the Mosaic covenant is no longer functional covenant. It's not even functional for the Jews right now, right? You have to understand that that Christ has superseded this covenant. But even if it was still functional, you have to understand that the Mosaic covenant was not given to us Gentiles. So by any shape, by any way, by any form or shape, we have to understand Christians are not part of that covenant. So think of Hebrews 8, for example. By calling this covenant new, that is the new covenant, new የተባለው, he has made the first one obsolete. He has made the Mosaic covenant obsolete ይለናል። The whole contention of Paul, for example, in Romans and Galatians, is try to stop some Messianic Christians, some Jewish Christians, from trying to drag Gentile Christians into the Mosaic covenant, right? The reason that Moses was so against circumcision in texts like Galatians, Romans, is that he felt like Gentile Christians were being dragged into the Mosaic covenant as if they needed to be part of that covenant in order to be the true people of God, in order to be followers of Christ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ so I think of I would imagine that sometimes that Paul, if he was alive today, and if you could see what's happening today, I think you would be utterly surprised that Christians willingly take circumcision as a ritual, as a habit. I know we don't take it as part of being initiated into the Mosaic covenant and all, but within his context, covenant was such a Jewish thing that he felt it necessary to write 2 letters against to want Christians being circumcised. I know we have a different purpose, but still, it's funny to me that Paul was so hard fighting. He fought hard for Gentile for Gentiles not to have been circumcised, but we willingly give into it now. I know we have different purposes. I think we're not doing that as part of being initiated into the Mosaic covenant, but it's still funny, right? Anyways, so we have to understand that we are not part of the Mosaic covenant. Okay, we are not Jews. We are not Israelites. We are Gentiles, and the Lord has willed to accept us through Christ, disregarding our ethnic identity. So we have to understand that the Mosaic covenant was never for us, was never about us, about Christians and about Gentiles ማለት ነው. Hence, the Old Testament law, as part of the Mosaic covenant, is no longer applicable over us as law. Okay, it's not binding over us. It's not binding over us now, and it was never binding over us. So we first have to understand that we are not the audience for it ማለት ነው. Hence, we should always keep this theological consideration when dealing with the Old Testament law. This is, as I've already said, in addition to the exegetical steps that we've discussed ማለት ነው. So this, however, doesn't mean that the law section of the Bible doesn't have any authority over Christians, or that it's not inspired, or that it's not the word of God. Okay, but we read it in different light ማለት ነው. We don't read it as ones who are reading a binding text over us. We rather are reading it with different purpose ማለት ነው. For example, think of the Constitution of USA or something. You might read it for different purposes, but it means that it's binding over you, right? You will still read it, and you might find it helpful for your life, or you might read it for academic purposes. Those of you who are, for example, lawyers, or who work around the court system, around the legal system, you might read, for example, the Constitution of Kenya, Uganda, for different purposes, but it doesn't mean that it's binding over you, right? It doesn't mean that it's law over you. So the same is true for the Old Testament law when it comes to Christians. Not only Christians, but when it comes to Gentiles as well. It's not binding over us, and we read it with different purpose ማለት ነው. So we still read it because we believe it's God's word, it's inspired, but we read it in different light. Okay, we read it with different purpose ማለት ነው. So you should always be aware of this. So what are some considerations that you should, so the theological consideration you should have in mind is what we discussed, but you should also take another consideration in addition to the exegetical steps we discussed. So the first one is you have to investigate the historical context. Okay, what makes investigating the historical context of law a bit different from investigating the historical context of other writing is that you should especially be aware of the polemical context, the polemical quality of the Old Testament law. For example, think of that example we said about not boiling a goat's daughter, a goat in its mother milk, የጠቦትን በእናቷ ወተት ውስጥ አትቀቅሏት የሚለውን, for example, when you think of that, the best way to understand that text is to consider the polemical context. That's polemics is a negative form of apologetics, right? So when you talk about apologetics is defending your own faith, right? It's defending what you believe. It could be defending Christian doctrines. It could be defending Christology, Trinity, things like that, right? Polemics, in a way, is a negative aspect of it. The polemics is defending your faith by in a way showing the flaws of other faiths, by attacking others ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ኦፌንሲቭ የሆነ ፖለቲክስ ማለት ነው ፖለሚክስ። ኦኬ ሶ the Old Testament lawም polemical quality ያለው, it shows a polemical quality in the sense that some of the laws we find in the Old Testament, especially the ones that seem so odd to our ears, like the ones that tell us not to boil a goat in its mother milk. They are written polemically as a way of attacking other people's faith, because we know that the neighbors of Israel back then, they had a habit of boiling goats in its mother milk in order to find fertility. It's a way of combining both life and death. It's a it's some kind of a magical right kind of thing in light of that historical context. In light of that context ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ you have to investigate the historical context. So when doing that, you have to be conscious of the polemical quality of the text. Okay, you should. This applies to all of the Old Testament. In fact, there is polemics in the Old Testament. For example, the example I given you is found in Deuteronomy 14. For example, there is a commandment that says, "You are the children of the Lord your God. You will not cut yourselves or shave your head for the dead." ይላል። ስለዚህ ሰው ሲሞት ራሳችሁን አትተልትሉ I had a documented habit of doing this once a beloved dies. They had a habit of they respected that deceased person. Making the polemical context. Okay, so this polemical context, as I've said, is available when investigating the biblical encyclopedias, Bible backgrounds. You will find it, but if you are the more comparative study, okay, you can compare section of laws found from Ugarit. There is also what's called the Middle Assyrian laws. So these are also so you have to keep this in mind when dealing with the Old Testament law. You should appreciate that the polemical quality, the polemical context ማለት ነው። So this polemical context is found throughout the Old Testament. For example, think of the term a strong hand or a strong arm. For example, when God delivered his people from Egypt, it was written it seems to have been a favorite way of identifying the pharaohs of Egypt. The pharaohs, the kings of Egypt, they had a tendency to refer themselves as possessing a strong arm or የጸናች ክንድ ምናምን የሚል እንደዚህ አይነት መጠሪያ ነበራቸው። ስለዚህ when the Pentateuch talks about God delivering his people with a strong arm, in a way this is polemical, right? So it gives you what's actually being communicated, right? It shows you how God actually is showing that other gods are empty, that their might is empty. So this kind of polemical quality is found throughout the Old Testament, and you should be sensitive to this polemical quantity when investigating the historical context ማለት ነው። So other than that, the common goes that these laws reflect their time, their historical place, right? If these laws were given in the 21st century, they might have had laws about, for example, about driving, about using tractors and all that. But since it was given in the ancient times, we find about laws about for example, riding a donkey, about farming, things like that. So they were given in that specific period. So it's also important to understand that place more. Hence, you should keep this in mind ማለት ነው. So this one is about the example I gave you about cooking a young goat in its mother milk. So this seems to have been a Canaanite fertility ritual. So this we can also see that it has something to do with fertility, because this commandment is given 3 times in the Old Testament, and all of it is given in the context of the first fruits, about in the context of giving bakurat መንለውኛ ማለት ነው. So the idea is that once people finished harvesting their field, the Canaanites, they seem to have had a habit of boiling a young goat in its mother milk as a way of making sure that that fertility, that the way that richness of harvesting continues ማለት ነው. ስለዚህ the biblical writers, Old Testament writers, are opposing this, using this commandment ማለት ነው. So God doesn't need this kind of rituals in order to make his people and their work fruitful. He has his own ways of blessing them. They don't need to do this kind of magical rites or rituals ማለት ነው. So in a way, this is what we call polemics ማለት ነው. እያጠቃቸው ነው ማለት ነው ሌሎችን በጊዜው የነበሩ ሃይማኖታዊ ስርዓቶችን ማለት ነው. For example, if you find if for example if the Orthodox Church, for example, if it gives a new proclamation, for example, a new commandment, ለምሳሌ መዝሙር ሲዘመር ለምሳሌ መዝለል አይቻልም የሚባል ህግ ብታወጣ የኢትዮጵያ ኦርቶዶክስ ተዋሕዶ ቸርች በአሁኑ ኮንቴክስት ማለት ነው, we all understand that it's polemics against us, right? It's we would understand that it's directly pointed towards us. So these laws in their own time were also directed against other idols, other gods ማለት ነው. Hence, in addition to the consideration, and we've also talked about making sure you understand the polemical context whenever there is one, especially when doing this polemical context. You should try to compare them with other laws. So biblical scholars, they have had quite considerable success of gathering other laws that were applicable during that period. So laws from the ancient Near East, from the neighbors of Israel. So comparing the Old Testament law with those laws give us a good insight about the emphasis of the biblical writers ማለት ነው. ስለዚህ እሱን በማድረግ it's important to do that. It tells us how the Old Testament laws are unique and what actually is being emphasized. So doing that's important. So we should consider both the historical and literary context of the law. For example, as I've said earlier, in Leviticus 19, we find a variety of separation laws about not wearing 2 kinds of garments and things like that. But that's given in a wider context that talks about holiness. So those laws has something to do with holiness ማለት ነው. ስለዚህ investigating literary context still applies ማለት ነው. ስለዚህ Leviticus 19 starts up by saying that you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Then it talks about wearing one kind of clothes. It talks about separating. So the word holiness is about separating, right? So in a way, those kind of laws like not wearing 2 kinds of garments, laws like not planting 2 kinds of seeds in your field, they are given as a way of reflecting God's holiness, God's otherness. God, since God is separate, and since God is completely other, your way of life should reflect that እያለ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ we have to understand those kind of laws of separation in light of this, in light of God's holiness እያለ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ the literary context helps ማለት ነው። it's also good to identify the type of law in question. So is this a criminal law? Is this a case law that is causative law in a way? The condition based on a law in a way? Is this family law? Does it apply in a family section? Is it sacrificial law? Is it sacred calendar law? የበዓላት ህግ ነው ወይ? Is it compassionate law? እነዚህ የኮምፓሽኔት ህጎች አሉ ድሆች እንዲጠቀሙ ተብሎ የተሰጡ አይደል? ሶ እንደሱ አድርጎ ሎዎቹ ምን አይነት ሎ እንደሆኑ አይደንቲፋይ ማድረግ መሞከር ጥሩ ነው ማለት ነው። ሶ this is a basic guideline, okay? And third one is, and the most important for our purpose, is to describe the purpose of the law. So my contention is that we should apply the law, the Old Testament law, in a way that gives account to the purpose of the law. Christians ከኦልድ ተስታመንት ሎ የምንማረው I believe is to revolve around the purpose of the law, around the spirit of the law, around the spirit behind the law. So, for example, identifying the purpose of the law is asking questions like, what kind of situation is being promoted? So, what kind of situation is being promoted? ይሄ ህግ የተሰጠው ምን አይነት ሲቹዌሽንን ፕሮሞት ለማድረግ ነው? For example, think of that law about not boiling goats in its mother milk. So, what kind of situation does that promote? It promotes a religious environment that is free from syncretism, for example. It's not about borrowing rituals from other religions to the worship of Yahweh. So there are, for example, laws about that are related about the poor. For example, there is a law about not harvesting your field twice. You are encouraged to leave some for the poor, right? What kind of situation is that encouraging? It's encouraging a situation in which the poor has something to live in, right? It's encouraging about providing something for the poor. It's about social responsibility, right? So identifying the purpose of the law means to identify what kind of situation is being promoted. So when that law is actually enforced, what kind of law is being applied? What kind of law is being applied? I mean, what kind of situation is being promoted? What is the purpose of it, ማለት ነው? And answering questions like who will benefit from the law, for example. Who will benefit from the law? For example, there are laws. That prohibit intermarriage, right? So what is the purpose? Who will benefit from that law? Who is supposed to be the beneficiary from that law? For example, there are laws that protects, for example, the widows, right? So what is the purpose of that law? Who will benefit from that law? If that law is being enforced, for example, who will benefit? Who will benefit? For example, think of laws in our current country. For example, there are laws about not littering in public, right? Not throwing away your trash and all that. So asking who will benefit ማለት so if that law is being enforced, when that law is enforced, who will apply? Who will benefit from that law directly? So the community will benefit, right? So as answering that kind of questions ማለት ነው። This seems unique. Was it a common thing in the ancient Near East? Did other nations, other neighboring nations, have the same law, or is this uniquely an Israelite law? So identifying these contexts help us appreciate what is being emphasized ማለት ነው. And then we can try to apply it ማለት ነው. So to apply it doesn't always mean to turn it into action, okay? It just, to apply it means to let it speak to us, to let it affect our context, okay? It could be to inform us, it could be to transform us, to change us, and sometimes it might be turning it into actually action ማለት ነው. ስለዚህ okay, this law spoke to the Israelites in this way, and how does this speak to me? What does this mean? What does it tell me about the situation being promoted? What does this tell me about God? And what does this tell me about its seriousness ብሎ መጠየቅ ማለት ነው. So to apply it means to identify these steps ማለት ነው. Good. So I have given you 2 example passages here, and I want you to do this at home, okay? When doing this, I believe I have copied this PowerPoint in the shared drive earlier. It means to answer these basic guidelines and to identify the purpose of the laws and how could we apply it ብሎ መመለስ ማለት ነው. Is it clear? የጻፋችሁልኝን መጠየቅ መመለስ ልጀምር ነው.
Yeah,
So yes,
clear.
right, Asir?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
clear.
good. So Acts 15 ጋር እንዳልኩ
Yeah.
we agree with the conclusion of Acts 15. The law is not for us, but
Thank you.
that doesn't mean that it has something to tell us now, as it was a reflection of God's purpose and God's intention. We have something to learn from it, and the best way to do that, I believe, is to try to investigate the purpose of the law, the spirit of the law behind it. So I don't understand that. So this doesn't mean that, for example, Christians, we don't have commandments about, for example, about killing or about adultery or things like that. The New Testament has its own ethics, right? The New Testament has its own ethics.
Yeah.
Not only
Yeah.
that, the New Testament assumes that there is natural law, right? Romans 1 tells us that we Gentiles, we are bestowed upon in a way a conscious or a natural law that for example tells us what is acceptable and what's not. So this is not about this. The conclusion of this doesn't mean that we have no commandment not to kill, or that killing is not morally wrong, or things like that. Morality can also be derived from our conscious, from natural law, and the New Testament itself has its own ethics. The New Testament has its own ethics. So that's not the conclusion, but we are seeing the Old Testament law, as I've already said, the Old Testament commandment as part of the covenant. So since we are not in that covenant, we have to know that it doesn't have a bearing on us. And this was the life purpose of the Apostle Paul, right? It was about making sure that Gentiles were not pulled into the Mosaic covenant and was not pulled into the Mosaic requirement, because as he said, even the Jews couldn't carry that weight, right? So we are not trying to carry that weight. But it is a reflection of God's purpose. It still has something to tell us, and it's about trying to identify that purpose ማለት ነው. The problem with being selective when it comes to the Old Testament law is that it will lead to inconsistency, and it will lead us to miss some important things that we should recognize. So we should being selective. So being selective by itself is not systematic, right? So it's an oxymoron. We shouldn't do that. We rather should have a comprehensive framework in which we are open to dealing with every law that we find in the Old Testament. So it's simply wrong to think that, oh, this doesn't apply, and whenever it seems doable, okay, we can apply it. So that's just wrong. So we should have.
Thank you. Thank you. My understanding is that I will give you my spirit in Hebrew. He said, I will give my spirit to you, and that spirit helps you to keep all my commandments. Of course, still there is a commandment, but we follow or we do that commandment by the Holy Spirit, but not by our own strengths. The difference is that.
Yes, there is that difference, and also these commandments, the commandments Jesus is talking about, is not the Old Testament law. So, for example, think of Romans 8. In Romans 8, Paul, for example, compares. He introduces something called the law of the Spirit, right? He says, "Adela, የመንፈስ ሕግ" ይላል። So exactly እሱ ምንድን ነው የሚለው? Of course exegetically የሚያከራክር ነገር አለው፣ ግን the idea is not about since we Christians have a transformed heart, it doesn't mean that we are equipped to follow the Mosaic covenant or the Mosaic law. That's not the point. The point is that since we have the Spirit, we have a transformed spirit, and we can obey God now, and we can please Him. But we please Him not by following the Old Testament law or the Old Testament covenant. So rather, it's another obedience. Paul calls it ከእምነት የሆነ መታዘዝ የሚለው ማለት ነው. So it could be loving. It could be love, for example. Some understand it that Paul is talking about love as a commandment. Love, since the Bible says that all of the commandment is summarized in love. But still, the idea is not, since we have a transformed spirit, we can now obey the Mosaic laws. I mean, we might have the heart to do that. The Spirit of the Lord might. God's purpose not for us to be Israelites now. The Mosaic commandment is about being an Israel. የሚለው መልስ እኮ ነው። እግዚአብሔር የአይሁድ አምላክ ብቻ ነው ወይ ብሎ የሚጠይቀው። ከዛ ወደ ኋላ ሄዶ አብርሃም እኮ ሳይገረዝ ነው ፕሮሚስ የተገባለት። So the commandment, it's not binding to us as a law, as an obligation, but still it has something to tell us about ethics. It has something to tell us about God, and we try to identify that, and we try to live in light of that ማለት ነው. And ለመልከት ኮማንድመንቱን ይሰጥ አናየውም። ግን ስለዚህ when it comes to the እንትን ነው ያው አንዳንድ ትራዲሽኖች ጥሩ ናቸው necessarily ተለምደው ስለቆዩ ፕራክቲስ ቢደረጉ ፕሮብለማቲክ አይደሉም ግን it might be a bit I find it a bit difficult a bit uncomfortable በተለይ አንዳንድ ሰባኪዎች አስራት ስላልሰጣችሁ እግዚአብሔርን እየሰረቃችሁ ኃጢአት ብለው ሰዎችን አንዳንዴ በጣም ሲያስጨንቁ I find it a bit problematic so እንደዛ እንድታደርጉ ኢንከሬጅ አላደርጋችሁ giving generally is a very in the New Testament ስለዚህ ሰዎች እንዲሰጡ ለማድረግ በዚህ መልኩ ሳይሆን ብዙ ምክንያቶች ብዙ ጥሩ ምሳሌዎች አሉን ሰዎች ፈልገው እንዲሰጡ የምናደርግበት in the New Testament ለምሳሌ ጳውሎስን ካስታውሳችሁ ጳውሎስ ለኢየሩሳሌም ላለችው ቤተክርስቲያን እንደዛ ሲሰበስብ እየዞረ አንድም ቦታ ላይ አስራት ምናምን አይላቸውም ባይዘው አይደል ይልቁንስ ኢየሱስ ራሱን እንደሰጣቸው እና የመቄዶንያን ሰዎች ከባዶነታቸውም ሰጡ we are one ስለዚህ እንትን ብሎ በዛ መልኩ እንትን ያደርጋል ስለዚህ እኛ ኢየሱስ ራሱን የሰጠን ሰዎች ስለሆነ ስንሰጥም ኢንፋክት መስጠት የምንችል ሰዎች እንደዛ አይነት እንትን ላይ ያለን 10% የሚለው ሊይዘን አይገባም ኢንከሬጅ የምንደረገው ሁለት ያለው አንድ እንዲሰጥ ነው ራዲካሊ እንድንሰጥ ነው እስከሚያመን ድረስ እንድንሰጥ ነው ኢንከሬጅ የምንደረገው ዚስ የአስራት እንትን የሚለው ኒው ቴስታመንት ሌላ ኮንቨርሴሽን ነው የሚሆነው ብዙ የሚሆን ሀሳብ የለኝም እንዳላችሁበት ቸርች እንትን አድርጉት ስለዚህ እንደ ጥሩ ሀቢት ቢወሰድ ሹር ሳሙኤል
ይቅርታ እሱ ላይ አይ ዛሬ ሀሳቡ ስለተነሳም ብቻ ሳይሆን ከዚህም በፊት ጥያቄ ስለነበረኝ ነው ያው እሱን ለማንሳት የቻልኩት ማለትም ማለት ከመሰጠቱ በፊት ሆኖም ህግ ከተሰጠ በኋላ አስራት እንዲሰጥ እግዚአብሔር በሙሴ በኩል ይህንን እያዘዘው ከ12ቱ ነገድ አሁን ለምሳሌ የሌዊ ነገድ የራሳቸው የሆነ ርስት የላቸውም ቤት የላቸውም እርሻ የላቸውም ስለዚህ ምግብም ይሁን የሚያስፈልገውን ነገር የሚያገኙት 12ቱ ነገድ በሚያቀርቡት አስራት ነው አሁን ወደ እኛ ዘመን ስንመጣ ወደ አዲስ ኪዳን ስንመጣ አሁን የእግዚአብሔርን ቤት ለማገልገል ብሎ ትምህርቱን የተዋ እርሻውን የተዋ የራሱ የሆነ ርስት የሌለ ቤት የሌለ ሰው የለም ምናልባት ካለም በሚሽን አማካይነት የወጣ ካለ በዛ ነው እንጂ ስለዚህ አሁን ቅድም አንተ እንዳልከው አንዳንድ ጊዜ ሲሰበክም ስለ አስራት ሲወራም በቃ እሱን አላማ እንደ ቅጣት እንደሚመጣና እንደሚያስከትል ተብሎ ስለሚወራ ነው በዛ ዙሪያ ላይ የሆነ አንደርስታንዲንግ ቢኖረን ብዬ ነው እኔ ለማንሳት ያልኩት
ልክ ነው አይ አግሪ እንዳልኩ አንዳንድ ነገር ቤተክርስቲያን ውስጥ እንትን ሲል አንዳንድ ነገሮች እንደ ትራዲሽኑ ነው ቢቀጥሉ እንደ ትውፊቱ ነው ቢቀጥሉ ችግር የለውም ምሳሌ 10 ሰዎች ይሄ ኃጢአት ምናምን እያለን በጣም ሀርሽ የሆኑ አይደለ በተለይ ቤተክርስቲያን ያው እኔ ቤተክርስቲያን ውስጥ ስላደኩኝ ስለማውቅ ነው አንዳንዱ ነገር በድፍረት ማውራው እንትን ስለሚሆን አንዳንዴ በጣም ለጆሮ የሚከብዱ ነገሮች ይባላሉ በተለይ የሆነ የመስጠት ገረችበት እንደሚችል ነው ማስበው ኢንፋክት አሁንም ለምናየው ገንዘብን በተመለከተ ላለ አቢዩዝ ብዙ ቦታዎች ላይ በየቲቪውም ተዝረክርኮ ለምናየው ይሄ አስራት እያለን የምንለው ነገር ትንሽ ሮል ያለው ይመስለኛል ጀነራል ኢንካሬጅ መደረግ ያለበት የሚመስለኝ እኔ ክርስቲያኖች የተቀበልነው ህይወት አሰሆል እና ምናምነው እምነት እንድንሰጥ ለሰዎች እንድንተርፍ የሚያደርግ አይዲያ ለሌዋውያን የሆነ ቦታ ለእሱን እየወሰድነው ነው። ግን አንዳንዴ ለድሆች መስጠት ሊሆን ይችላል። ለእግዚአብሔር መስጠት ማለት ለቤተክርስቲያን መስጠት ወይ ለአገልጋይ መስጠት ማለት አይደለም። በዚህ ዘመን ያመጣ ነው። ትንሽ when it comes to the Old Testament laws we shouldn't be selective። ለምሳሌ አስራትን ፎሎ እናደርጋለን፣ ሌላውን ፎሎ አናደርግም። ወይም የሚመች ይመስላል። ለምሳሌ እናትና አባትን አክብር ይላል እንላለን፣ ከዛ ሌላውን ደግሞ እንትን እንላለን። እነዚህን ሁሉ የምናደርግበት አንድ ፍሬምወርክ ያስፈልገናል፣ ለሁሉም ፌር የሆነ ማለት ነው። ሴሌክቲቭ መሆን ሲስተማቲክ አይደለም። ስለዚህ ከእናንተ ኤክስፔክት የምናደርገው እናንተ ይሄንን በዚህ ቴዎሎጂካል ኮንሲደሬሽን ላችሁ ስታነቡት እናንተ try to be careful። ክርስቲያኖች መስጠት አለባቸው። ቤተክርስቲያን ውስጥ ኢንፋክት አንዳንድ ሰዎች I agree አንዳንድ ሰዎች ገንዘብ ሊሰጣቸው የሚገባ ናቸው፣ ስጡ ተብለው ሊጨነቁ የሚገባ አይደሉም። እንደዛ ነው የቤተክርስቲያንን ትራዲሽን ስናይ እንደዛ ነው የምናየው። ታይዚንግ በጣም ኮመን የሆነው ምናምን በታሪክ ውስጥ ነው አክቹዋሊ ያለው። ቤተክርስቲያን እንዴት አስራትን መቀበል ጀመረች ምናምን ብላችሁ ኢንቨስቲጌት ካደረጋችሁ ሜይ ቢ ለሌላ ኮርስ ኢንቨስቲጌት አድርጉት። ከሆነ ካውንስል በኋላ ምናምን ነው የሆነ ካልተሳትኩኝ ኦኬ እየረሳሁትኝ ነው ሶሪ። ግን በጊዜ ውስጥ ነው በጣም ኮመን እየሆነ የመጣው። ከዛ ደግሞ ከሌላው በተለየ ኢቫንጀሊካልስ ደግሞ እንትን አድርገነዋል። ስለዚህ መስጠት ጥሩ ነው። ኢንፋክት መጽሐፍ ቅዱስ ኢንካሬጅ የሚያደርገን ያለንን ሁሉ እንድንሰጥ ነው። ቲንክ ኦፍ የሐዋርያት ስራ ለምሳሌ አይደል፣ ሁሉም ያላቸውን እያመጡ በሐዋርያት ስራ እግር ስር ያደርጉ ነበር። ስለዚህ this is not about greed or about not giving but አንዳንዴ ከፍሬምወርክ ትንሽ ወጣ ብሎ ለማየት መሞከር ጥሩ ነው። The bigger point I'm trying to make, and that's directly related with this course, is that we shouldn't be selected about when it comes to selective when it comes to Old Testament. ሳምንት ሎ ራዘር we should ምንድነው ፊልም አለ ባይዘው አስራታችሁን አውጡ ከዛ ተሰብስባችሁ ብሉት የሚልም ጥቅስ አለ። አሰሆል በእግዚአብሔር ፊት ደስ ይበላችሁ የሚልም አለ። ስለዚህ ከነዛ ውስጥ እናወጣ የምንችለው ፕሪንሲፕል ለምሳሌ ኦኬ እግዚአብሔር ለእሱን ስራ የሚያገለግሉ ሰዎች ሰፈር እንዲያደርጉ አይፈልግም። ስለዚህ እነሱ እንዲጠቀሙ ነው ሄሎ የተሰጠው። ፕሮሞት እየተደረገ ያለው ሲቹዌሽን ደግሞ የጊቪንግ ሲቹዌሽን ነው where everyone shares what he has ምናምን ብለን የሆነ ፍሬምወርክ እናወጣለን ማለት ነው። አይ ቢሊቭ በዛ መልኩ አፕላይ ልናደርገው እንችላለን ብዬ አስባለሁኝ። እሱን ነው እንደ ፕራክቲስ እንድታደርጉ የምፈልገው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ አሁን ቴክ ዚስ ቱ ቨርስስ እና ያልኳቸው እነዚህን ስቴፖች በኮንሲደር ባደረገ መልኩ ልታጠኗቸው ሞክሩ። ስለዚህ ሂስቶሪካል ኮንቴክስቱን ፖለሚካል ኮንቴክስት ካለው ብላችሁ መጽሐፎችን ኢንቨስቲጌት አድርጉ። ከዛ በኋላ ፐርፐዙ ደግሞ ምንድን ነው ብላችሁ እነዛን ያነሳናቸውን ጥያቄዎች ለመመለስ ሞክሩ። ፓወርፖይንቱን ኮፒ ስላደረግኩት ታያችኋላችሁ። እነሱን ሞክሩ። ከዛ ኦኬ ከዚህ ሎ ይሄን ሎ ሳነበው ወይ ሲሰብከው እነዚህን ነው ማለት ነው አፕላይ ማድረግ ያለብኝ የሚል ኮንክሉዥን ኢሜይል አድርጉልኝ ማለት ነው። this is not part of your homework እንዳልኳችሁ this is additional point ነው። ከሰርታችሁ ከላካችሁልኝ additional point ይጽላችኋለሁ። ይሄንን አድርጉ። questions?
አንፎርቹኔትሊ ሁሉም ዶክመንቶች አልከፈታሉኝና ኒው ቴስተመንት የተላኩ
ቴሌግራም ጋር ያለው ገባ አሁን አልቋል ገብቶ ኦኬ ቴሌግራም ጋር እሺ አልከፍታሉ ኢፐብ ሪደር ሆነው ነው ኢፐብ የሚሉ ከሆነ የተለየ ፋይል ፎርማት ነው ኢፐብ ሪደር የሚባል ዳውንሎድ አድርግ። ኦኬ ዝም ብለህ ጉግል ላይ ኢፐብ ሪደር ብለህ ዳውንሎድ አድርግ። ከዛ እሱ እንትን ነው ልክ ዶት ፒዲኤፍ ሳይሆኑ ዶት ኢፐብ ስለሆኑ ነው ኢፐብ ሪደር። ኦኬ ለዛ ነው። Good. Anyone else? Any question? Okay, so just to recap, እንድትይዙ የሚፈለገው ከዚህ ኤቨሪስቲካል ስቴፕስ ብለን ያልናቸውን ሁሉ ሁሌ ፎሎ የምናደርገው ነው ለሁሉ ነገር። ከዛ ደግሞ ዲፔንዲንግ ኦን ዘ ዣንራ ዲፔንዲንግ ኦን ታይፕ ኦፍ ቴክስት አንዳንድ ኮንሲደሬሽንስ ኢምፖርታንት ናቸው። ዛሬ የኦልድ ቴስታመንት ሎ ኮንሲደሬሽንስ ነው ለማየት የሞከርነው። ስለዚህ እነሱን ባማከለ መልኩ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ለምሳሌ ኦልድ ተስታመንት ላይ ያጠናችሁ እኮ ቨርስ ባይ ቨርስ አናሊሲስ መስራት ሊኖርባችሁ ይችላል። የሆነ ኤክስቴቲካል ፔፐር ላይ ቢሆን ወይ ወርድ ስተዲ ታደርጋላችሁ። እነሱን አታደርጉ ማለት አይደለም፣ ግልጽ ነው። ግን እነሱንም ስታደርጉ you should be aware of the things we discussed አሁን ማለት ነው። is that clear? okay good ፊታችሁን ስለማላየው በዛ ነው ጨቀጭቃችሁ እንዳትረዳችሁና እንዳልተረዳችሁ። ክላስ ውስጥ ሲሆን ሌላ ጊዜ ተማሪዎች ግራ ሲገባቸው ያስታውቀኛል። እናንተም በምን ላውቀው? okay
clear understandable
all right ስለዚህ see you next week ጌታ ቢፈቅድ። አሰፋ እንዳልኩ feel free to email me. okay we can arrange something.
Thank you. I'll do it.
all right have a good one everyone.
Thank you very much.
thank you
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening.
ወዳጆች thank you ቻው
መልካም አዳር ይሁንላችሁ። ቻው።
ሳሚ ስለ አስራት እናወራለን ሌላ ጊዜ